Since Pochettino made the tactical tweak of inverting Cucurella into the midfield at half-time against Aston Villa being 2-0 down, Chelsea have scored 9 goals, conceded 0, and in 2.5 games played, they are unbeaten with an aggregate score of 9-0. But what are the basis of the tactical tweaks that Pochettino has made with this Chelsea team? How has he turned things around? Let's get into it and let's take a little deeper dive into these tactical tweaks that Pochettino has made. This is the typical team that we've seen in those 2.5 games. So the half-time change against Aston Villa and then the 2 games following, which against Spurs and against West Ham, where we won 2-0 and 5-0. And the tactical tweaks we're going to cover are based on the build-up pattern, which includes Cucurella inverting and how that also helps with the rest defence. We're also then going to touch on a few of the attacking patterns that have sort of collided with this tactical change and how it's sort of working. And then we'll also go on to the defence and a big change in the mentality, not only the tactical sort of principles of the defending, but also the mentality that has gone into the change of defending and the overall feel it has under Pochettino now. So the first thing I want to talk about is this sort of 3-2+1 base, which we spoke about before in another video. So if you go back to my old Cucurella inverting video, it was sort of speaking about how Cucurella inverting creates that 3-2 base, but then you've also got one of Gallagher or Palmer who come in as that sort of +1. They often decide to drop in or out depending on creating overload. So if there's a chance for one of them to drop in, help the midfield line progress the ball through the lines, one of them will drop in and the other one will then push forward to sort of create that 3-3-4 shape. But what we're also beginning to see again is that box midfield, sort of that 3-box-3 shape that we saw a lot in pre-season. We saw the benefits of it in pre-season. They're all close together, players that can intricately keep the ball and they can progress the ball through the lines. They can all play as decoy, third-man runs for each other, third-man combinations, and it just works so perfectly. If they lose the ball, it's also brilliant for counter-pressing. Look how close together they are in that box. If one of them loses the ball, say in the centre of the box, all 4 of them can swarm and they're all in close proximity to help each other and do each other's jobs for them if one fails in their role. One of the biggest benefits from these tactical tweaks is Chelsea's ability to sustain possession in the opposition half. Often, Cucurella and Caicedo will make sure that they're parallel and they're trying to stay in line with each other in terms of the height that they are operating at, so that they're ready to pounce together when the ball does break, or if one does go, the other one can cover the space left behind. The idea here is to always have that sort of 3 and then the 2 base, like I said, with Cucurella and Caicedo, behind the ball so they can sustain pressure in the opposition half, keep the ball pinned in and make sure that all of, in this instance, West Ham's players were in their own half defending. So then when the ball did eventually break, they've only got one outlet to hit. And this has happened against Tottenham as well, who they were just trying to hit that one outlet in Son. And a lot of the time, they didn't have a lot going for them. They were getting pinned back into their own half. And this is very much due to the aggressive nature of that double midfield pivot, which is created by Cucurella going inside and they operating parallel to each other. However, an important part to note is that in this instance, with this image, Chalobah actually makes the run into that right channel. So, and Madueke, as you can see, is actually in the centre of the pitch. So here you can see Palmer coming back with the ball after passing to Caicedo. It is then his job, because he will be behind the ball at this point, to almost act as that rest defence player instead of Chalobah. So if the ball does break over, you have Cucurella, Caicedo and Palmer who are there to swarm the ball, and then behind them you have Badiashile and Thiago Silva. So the idea is still to have those 5 players basically behind the ball for when the ball breaks, just in a more aggressive position where they can control it from their own in the opposition half. This also lends itself to having attacking players close to each other in and around the box. So in this example, you've got Noni Madueke actually in the centre of the pitch. So obviously from this, you can decipher that Cole Palmer is actually out on the right, which is out of the picture. And then you've got Mudryk, who is holding that left width. But then the 3 in the middle of the pitch, they're close together. And if the ball does break, which it does in that instance, Madueke, and it drops to Gallagher, who scores on the volley. This can again be seen in this image with Madueke holding the width. You've then got Palmer, Jackson and Gallagher in close proximity again, basically in that triangle. And then out of the picture, you've also got Mudryk holding the width on the left. There is a lot of rotation allowed within that front 5. As long as those 5 zones are being occupied, it doesn't really matter. A lot of the time you'll see Palmer going and swapping with Madueke and making runs that help each other get the ball in space to create those 1v1 isolations. That's something we're about to speak about in a bit more detail. But you sort of see that on the left as well. Sometimes if Jackson drifts out slightly, Mudryk will shift in slightly. And almost at times you can see all 5 players playing quite narrow to the box. And I think Pochettino has this element where he's actually doesn't mind there being this relationist phase that people talk about. Obviously, there's lots of relationist coaches that have that as a key principle, but there's been people like Motta who have spoke about it as more of a phase of play where there's points in the game that their players can just go and express themselves, and as long as they're still occupying all 5 of those zones horizontally, then they're still allowed to sort of go out and play their game and connect with each other based on their relationships and where they know the space is going to be. One thing we need to touch on about that left side when Cucurella has inverted is the movement and the positioning of Mudryk, and when to be aware that Cucurella is inverted and therefore that left flank is going to be left isolated. So as you can see here, he's sort of dropped into a sort of deeper area. He's not really high and wide. He's in a position that if the ball does break, he can help and he can track back to cover that left flank where Cucurella is now absent from. This does also mean that when he receives the ball, there's points that he receives the ball basically in a left-back area, deeper on the pitch than Cucurella is positioned, which then gives him more responsibility on the ball to not lose in that area of the pitch, because if he does lose it, then you're leaving yourself culpable to a counter-attack. So for me, the one thing I'd like to see Mudryk improve on playing on that left-hand side is I like the positioning that he's taking up, making sure he's cognizant of where Cucurella is positioned based on where he positions himself, but also just to be a bit more cautious in terms of the touches he takes when circulating the ball when he's in that left-back deep position. When he's high up the pitch, I have no issue in taking risks and losing the ball if it so means it, because he's trying to make things happen in the attacking third. But I just do think he needs to slightly refine his ball-playing abilities in deeper areas of the pitch, in more calm, circulatory possession. I think he could just tweak that slightly and just work on that. But I think that will come with time playing in this role and realising that he has to be more cautious on the ball and more protective of the ball in that area of the pitch. These average positions from the West Ham game basically show everything we've been talking about. It basically creates that 3-3-4 or sort of a 3-2-5 that we spoke about, which can be seen like this. And this is something else I wanted to touch on, showing this shape. There has actually been points in games where Cucurella has strayed further on than Gallagher. Gallagher dropping in as that +1, but then at times when the ball then has to be, when we break out from that first midfield line, Cucurella is actually straight ahead of Gallagher. As long as Gallagher is then cognizant and willing to fill that gap, which he has been the few times it's happened, Cucurella can then go and attack the box. As long as, like I said earlier with the rotations, as long as the zones are filled and you're still creating that similar shape, it doesn't really matter who does it, as long as the other players are mindful and they then replace the other players in those zones. That sort of zone replacement that I spoke about with Inzaghi and his Inter Milan side. So if you want to go check out that video, that explains a bit more of that zone replacement theory in that video. And then in this image, it just shows that same thing where I was talking about the 3-2, but then Gallagher being that sort of +1 to receive the ball, and then having that 4 in attack. So sort of creating that 3-3-4. Gallagher can sort of stray. He can come in a bit deeper to collect the ball. And then when they do break, Gallagher can then break into the front 5 as well. You've got Palmer basically positioned as a striker in this sense. He can come deeper. Gallagher can go forward. As I said, it's quite flexible in terms of who comes in as that +1 in possession when trying to build out from the back. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't think it's all just tactics. I also think the mentality shift in how we're defending has also changed. As you can see here, Badiashile is being more aggressive. He's willing to step out and he's willing to keep the attacking players facing their own goal. You've then got Gilchrist, who's ready to cover, and he's willing to cover centrally to stop them penetrating towards the goal. And Chelsea have been willing to force teams wide and stop the centre, and keeping that in capital letters, stop the centre, is something that Chelsea have really emphasised in terms of being aggressive in the middle of the pitch, keeping players with their back to goal and really protecting the goal and allowing things to come from out wide. These two have been brilliant next to each other the last few games. I think they've really been helping each other. Chalobah seems like he's been leading and he's been telling players when to step up. Badiashile's been instructing. There was a point against West Ham where Chalobah sort of left his man and he spoke to him and they actually sorted it out so it didn't happen again. The sort of responsibility on who's to go and who's to stay in that position. And even Cucurella, he's energising the team with his tackles. He's getting players up for it and he's giving everybody else that extra lease of life. And I think that's really happening. And I think this is all a mentality shift in wanting to defend and celebrating every defensive action that players make. And it's sort of bringing through this leadership, as I said, from Chalobah, who is actually one of the most, funnily enough, one of the more experienced players, crazily, at this club. And he's showing it. He's shown that he's played next to Thiago Silva for a few seasons under Tuchel, and he's really starting to grow into that role. of actually leading the team, and especially in that central centre-back position where he can instruct others where to be, or actually in that right centre-back position. I think he's played both at this point. But yeah, I think he's been brilliant, and I think Badiashil's been brilliant as well since playing next to Chalobah, because he did have a bit of a shaky start to the season, but he's been much better since these tactical tweaks. As I said, Cucurella has been absolutely instrumental to this, being in that rest defence in that 3-2 in central areas where he can be aggressive. He's a front foot defender. He's aggressive in the counter press. He's been winning the ball back in dangerous areas to then springboard attacks for Chelsea, which has also really helped. His positioning in that 3-2 build-up, his ability to play short, simple passes and aid other players, especially Caicedo. He's really helped out in making space for Caicedo to operate. And just even that ability to stray forward if Gallagher and Caicedo do stay there behind. His positioning in the rest defence to be aggressive and sustain possession in the opposition half. All of these things have massively helped Chelsea structurally. And that is why we're seeing a lot of the best from other players, not just Cucurella. Because this entire structure and his importance within it is excelling other people in their roles. Again, I just thought these two deserved a quick mention. I think their duality in midfield has been excellent alongside Cucurella. The amount of duels that they're all contesting together, their ability in rest defence to swarm the ball, not in rest defence, in counter press to swarm the ball, and their ability to get back in that rest defence and just help Chelsea. It's just really giving us such a good base to create from. It's allowing us to sustain possession for longer periods of time. And like I said, this is helping the attacking players get more touches on the ball, build their confidence throughout the game. And we're reaping the benefits with a 9-0 aggregate, as I said about earlier, scoring 9 goals in the last 2.5 games. So including that 2-0 comeback to 2-2 against Aston Villa, which actually should have been 3-2. But coming back in that game, and we've not conceded since, and that is very much down to the structure and how the rest of this team is playing together within this structure. And the last thing I wanted to speak in depth about is these attacking patterns that you're starting to see between Madueke, who I think has been absolutely superb in these last few games, probably second best player behind Cucurella for me in these games, and Cole Palmer, and that connection that they're bonding and they're forming on that right-hand side. Palmer playing in the 10, but of course he's played a lot on the right this season. He has that tendency to go over to the right. But as you can see here, with Madueke dropping deep, it then drags the fullback up with him, and Palmer sees that as an opportunity to get in behind, and this draws Alvarez away from the centre of the pitch. So this makes two scenarios. The one that actually happened is where Madueke found Palmer straight over the top and gives Palmer that 1v1 with Alvarez to go and basically in that right wing position. And he gets a bit of a mismatch because Alvarez isn't usually the man to beat in those fullback areas. But then on the other hand, you've got Madueke, for example. If he's dragged Alvarez out wide with him, if Madueke can then get the beating and drive inside away from the fullback, he's then got the entire of the pitch opened up for him. And this is something that Madueke is very, very good at, is driving into the space that's left for him. And then he can also find a switch over to Mudryk, or he can find a ball through the centre of the pitch. He can even drive all the way himself and get a shot off, because we've seen his ability to do that. So I think the amount of space that these two are opening up for each other, and their understanding of when to move into each other's zones and to move across each other's zones, and just their ability to rotate in and out and make things happen as a duo, I think we're really starting to see that, and it's really helping both of them play. I think Palmer, of course, he's been doing it anyway this season. He hasn't really needed the help. But now the fact that he's such a threat, it's also then giving space for other players like Madueke, who's been brilliant in the last few games. He's been in brilliant form, and he's really building his confidence now. You can see every time he gets the ball, he wants to make things happen. He's confident that he can make things happen. Got a goal and assist against West Ham, and he's just been brilliant. So I think their duo is definitely something to watch this season. For the rest of the games, the last few games of the season, I think both of them deserve to be starting in the exact same positions they're starting in. I don't think you change that part of the team right now. And I just wanted to leave it on this with the stats from the West Ham game and the table, which is from January 1st, if points had only been collected from the 1st of January 2024. Of course, we know that is not the case, but my point being is things are definitely on the up, and the players are definitely starting to mature, and they're starting to grow into this team bit by bit. They've already made a cup final this year. They narrowly lost in that FA Cup semi-final to Man City, which I actually think Chelsea were better in. I think that we probably deserved to win that game. I think we was unlucky not to. Played quite well. Missed a few key chances, Jackson specifically on that day. But the point being is things are on the up, and if the tactical tweaks stay the same as they have, which has seen a big increase in form for a lot of players, it's getting the best out of a lot of players, and I think it will continue to get the best out of a lot of players, even the ones returning, like when Enzo comes back. I think that's a massive plus. I don't think that's a negative at all. So I just wanted to end it on this high and sort of show you the way things are going, and that the tactical tweaks are very, very good, and they're really helping the entire team structure mold together as one, and it's bringing the best out of everybody in the team.